over the city. It was around 8 o'clock at night, and it was just gotten dark, just past dusk, and I saw a glowing light that was sitting over Shakey's Pizza Parlor on Santa Monica Boulevard, which is only about 6 blocks away. So I know it was there, and I could see it. I didn't need a telescope. And it was just there, and it hovered there for about 45 seconds, and then whoosh, it disappeared. Just boom, gone. So that's been my personal experience. And if you talk to a lot of people, like 100, 200 people, and you talk to them when they're, they've got time to talk to you and they're in a calm, they'll usually say something like, I either have seen something like that, or a friend of mine has told me that. That's how prevalent it is. And if you go down to South America, people welcome you with open arms. They say, "Oh, but of course, por supuesto, señor. It happens every day here."
Well, I think,
and that's in my book also.
I think it happens every day, everywhere. It's just, we are so good at propaganda in our country of trying to cover things up, and it's got to a point. I mean, how can I say this? People would have to be awful low intelligence not to believe that there is something happening. I mean, with UFO sightings, aliens, and things like that. There's just been too many of them. Going all the way back, in the 40s up here in Washington State, around Mount Rainier, one of the major sightings there. I mean, just all kinds of weird things has happened. That 2 pilots from the aircraft carrier, back a few years ago, it got released last November for some weird reason, where they were chasing after a UFO, even with their afterburners and all that stuff. And now that is circulated, and the government really didn't deny it. But, Charles, it was really funny. After that hit in November, come January, the Secretary of the Air Force was talking to the graduating cadets, and it was telling the cadets, it was kind of a strange thing. He said, well, our next war will not be a ground war. It will be in outer space.
Interesting.
Well,
well, that's a prediction.
Yeah, that is a very good prediction. Then it was even funnier yet. Then you have Trump a few months later saying, jokingly in a press conference, well, maybe I should create a space force. And then a few months later, then, they submitted into, the Pentagon to get it started. I don't know if it's going to go or fly or not. I don't know how we even had the money to fund it. And I don't know why the Air Force couldn't handle it, because they already do have basically a space force. But it's really funny is all this stuff is kind of, slowly coming out.
Well, I wrote an essay. I wrote a couple essays on this subject, and your listeners may be interested in looking for them online. One is Our Planet versus Theirs, is the name of one of them. It's only about 2 pages, I think. And in it, I allude to the fact that one of the reasons why we're not getting a very communication with aliens is because, let's face it, they know we're a warlike civilization. They don't want to come down and wind up as experimental test bodies in some laboratory or be hunted. It's not too far from. It's not too far-fetched to realize a lot of guys in Alabama, rednecks with shotguns and so forth. And they'd come after these guys if they didn't look like them, right? They'd go, we got to get rid of these guys quick, So one of the things that is a barrier is that the fact that we are really not ready. We're not civilized enough throughout our nations to accept the fact that there may be superior beings that can get from one end of the universe to the other in a matter of days or weeks, and we can't even get to Mars,
Yeah, and we basically have to use, a rocket to do what we're doing. I mean, it's just basically like shooting a bow and arrow up in the sky. I mean, we really don't still even have the capabilities to really go out in space and do anything unless the government has stuff, that we don't know about.
Yeah, very true.
And
now, another thing that might be of interest to our listeners is the subject of Atlantis. And the reason I bring up Atlantis, because I've studied that and read many books on it, is that Atlantis was a very advanced civilization that existed 10, 12,000 years ago before it went under. And even Plato has written about it. And later I might just read from one of his essays about what he says, a war between the Greeks, the Athenians, and the Atlanteans. But it goes back even further than that. But just going back 12,000 years, you realize there's been a tremendous history of alien visitors and alien populations, and even, stations where these type of ships would come and go, and there'd be all kinds of, parlay and and who knows, there'd be a transference of technology from one civilization to another, and so forth. I'm sure that is something of interest to our listeners, because it's not a new idea. Even this, this last century, it's not a new thing. It's just that there's a lot more interest in it because we're more technologically advanced in this new century and in the 20th century, where we can get the word out. We have the internet, we've got television, we've got, we can do all kinds of things with this information, whereas 150 years ago, what did you have? You had the Pony Express.
Oh, or you had the telegraph. I mean, before it burned
up. Or the telegraph,
yeah. But, I mean, now, let's face it, if I saw a UFO sighting, I can get on my computer, and thousands and tens of thousands of people will know about it within a few minutes.
That's right. And these pictures that have been taken by some of these researchers have been validated. A lot of them have been invalidated, have been found to be false and phony, because there's always, jokers who want to fool around with something just to get a little bit of notoriety. But there's thousands of excellent photographs, very clear photographs, that are not phony. And that's something else that people can look at and make a decision on, well, it looks like it's real, so, it's not for me, whatever. You always have a choice to not know something,
Well, what is really bad, though? Technology. From the standpoint, people go out and they buy a digital camera, and they don't realize the sensor in it can get dust on it. And they go out and, they start taking pictures. They don't even up the sky, hoping to get a UFO without even seeing one. Then they post it like on Facebook or some other media, right? That, oh, look at this UFO, or there's 3 of them. And then when you take their image, at least I have the capability, because I also was a professional photographer for many years. And I was one of the very first people to get Photoshop when it originally, even before it came out, as one of the beta testers. The thing is, you blow it up and you start looking at, well, that isn't a UFO. That's a dust bunny on their sensor, or 3 of them, because they take like a series of pictures. And then when you sit there and blow it all up and analyze it, that's in every one of their pictures. When they blow it up, they don't realize a fast f-stop at the sky, any dust on their sensor is going to show up, and they think automatically it's a UFO. The same as they think there's orbs. Yeah, you hit a very important point in researchers. You might call Achilles' heel. There's a website called FeedSpot, and it collects globally all of the reports of UFOs and sightings, and passes them on to subscribers for about $2 a month. So I became a subscriber about a week ago, and I'm just inundated with the number of reports and photos. In fact, I was looking at one yesterday. But unfortunately, the 2 films were of a spot so far in the distance, it just glimmered for a second. You couldn't tell whether it was a piece of aluminum foil floating in the air or what. So, the amateurs have it pretty rough because they can't really prove anything with it. But you take a guy like George Adamski, Flying Saucers Are Real, he spent sometimes weeks in one position with his camera, focused in one area, until a sighting. And he has excellent photographs. You see, he's a professional. He also used some of the Mount Palomar Observatory small telescopes to photograph much closer these spaceships.
and flying saucers. So yeah, so the amateur is kind of got one foot in the bucket there, whereas the pros, they know what it takes to get a product, a real picture or a real video.
I hate to say this, and I don't want to get people mad at me, but, before I would post a picture of, if I thought I had a UFO, I would certainly take the time to make sure that wasn't a piece of dust on the sensor before, publishing it to people to see, because then your credibility of your group or as an individual is totally ruined. I mean, when somebody looks at it and debunks it, oh, that isn't no UFO. That's piece of lint or dust on your sensor. And I've seen it so many times, especially on Facebook. I mean, there's so many people posting pictures up there thinking, well, this is a UFO or it's an orb or whatever. And then I'll sit there and I'll analyze it and I go, well, that's no UFO. But, that kind of does damage to the paranormal. It really does, because I really think before somebody publishes something, they need to at least have a little something to back it up.
Can I give you another experience that I didn't have, but my friends had, which I believe is to be totally truthful about sightings of saucers?
Yeah, please do.
Well, I had some friends. This was probably in the mid-'70s. They were in the area known as, it's where, I'm just thinking it's yellow. It's where Atlantis supposedly had sunk. Canary Islands. And it's not Canary because of the color. Canary comes from canis, from dog. The islands have been known to have lots of different dogs. In the Canary Islands, and they were on the starboard side of the ship, and there was a saucer within, listen to this, within about 300 yards of the ship. Very large, one of these silver rotating things, and very much interested in what was going on the ship for some reason. And the captain of the ship told them, he says, don't bother with them, just get on with your duties. And after about 4 or 5 minutes, the saucer took off. And that's a bona fide story from friends I trust.
Well, I really believe it because, I used to years ago, I don't know if you remember Republic Airlines. But they were,
yeah, I remember that one.
One of my friends at the time was a vice president. I don't remember of what division of Republic Airlines, but he worked his way up. But before he got onto the airlines, he used to fly B-52 bombers, from Guam to Vietnam, drop their load and then go back. And, he made a mistake one time that when he was flying to Nam to drop his load, he saw a UFO off his wing. And he reported it on the radio, and they told him, to go to another frequency and shut up. This is the story, and I believe him 100% because when he got back, they separated everybody, the whole crew, in the separate rooms. There was non-military guys, probably CIA or whatever, basically, telling them you can never talk about this. If you do, that's the end of your career. We can bring, charges against you, whatever the threats. Okay, he kept quiet, I don't know for how many years till he told me this story, but he also said that being the vice president of Republic Airlines, because he was a pilot, before he made vice president, one of the divisions, that pilots would, basically report they saw a UFO, and once they said they saw a UFO, their career was gone. That was it.
Yeah. Well, there is definitely an implanted. I would use the word implanted. Proscription, not proscription against speaking about it in public or in any official capacity because of this implanted thought in the society. I won't go into how I know about this, but just like, have you ever seen a hypnotist or gone on to a comedy venue, and instead of there being a comedian, there'll be a hypnotist who gets up on stage and he calls for subjects to come up on the stage and he hypnotizes them very quickly If they're susceptible, if they're not, he gets them off sends them away. And he has them do all kinds of strange things. And when he finally is done and he brings them back